All right, let's just jump right into it. Today we're tackling one of the biggest, most debated questions in theology. How can one person really pay for the sins of somebody else? I mean, it seems to go against our basic ideas of fairness, right? Well, we're going to explore one very specific and honestly kind of surprising answer to that question.
On the surface, it really does seem to go against our gut feeling about justice. The whole idea that guilt and consequences can just be transferred from one person to another, it feels wrong. But here's the thing. This isn't just a modern hang-up. It's a tension you can find right there in the biblical texts themselves. I mean, look at this. This principle, right out of the book of Ezekiel, seems about as crystal clear as it gets. You are responsible for your own stuff. A child can't suffer because of what their parent did. Every single person answers for their own sin. So this sets up the central puzzle, doesn't it? If this is the rule, how is the idea of Jesus' sacrifice even possible?
Okay, so the perspective we're digging into today argues that to find the answer, we've been looking in the wrong place entirely. It suggests that, yeah, that rule from Ezekiel totally applies, but only to one specific framework, the law of Moses. The argument is that Jesus was operating under a completely different system of justice. And here's where it gets really interesting. The sources we're looking at point to prophecy that says the Messiah isn't a priest under that law of Moses. You know, the Aaronic order? Nope. He's a priest in a much, much older order, the order of Melchizedek. Now, that might sound like a small detail, but it's not. It's a huge claim that Jesus worked within a totally separate spiritual system, with its own set of rules.
So if the law of Moses isn't the rulebook here, what is? Well, this argument points us all the way back, back to the very beginning, to the Garden of Eden. It claims this is where the real foundation, the precedent for this kind of justice, was actually set.
This brings us to what the source calls the first injustice. And the idea is pretty simple. Adam's choice to disobey God, well, it didn't just affect him. It let sin and suffering and death into the world, creating this condition that was then inherited by every single human being that came after him.
Just look at this chain reaction. One guy makes a choice, and because of that one choice, sin enters the world. And as a direct result, every person born from then on experiences the fallout. They experience suffering and death, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with that original decision. And the source material, it doesn't try to sugarcoat this. It looks at that situation and calls it what it is, an injustice. The fact that all of humanity has to suffer the consequences for something they didn't personally do. And that injustice, right there, becomes the core problem that needs a really unique solution.
So how in the world do you solve an injustice like that? Well, the argument proposes a solution that's perfectly symmetrical. You introduce a parallel figure, a second Adam, and this is the theological role that Jesus is said to fill, designed to be a perfect mirror image answer to the first Adam.
And here's that symmetry laid out perfectly. It's so clear. Just as all of humanity inherited death because of the first Adam's disobedience, the argument is that humanity can be offered a brand new inheritance, life, because of the second Adam's perfection. But here's the crucial difference. This new inheritance, it's not automatic. You have to choose it. You have to ask for it.
This whole framework is what the source we're looking at calls symmetric justice. And you can think of it like cosmic scales. If a great injustice was caused by one man's choice that affected everybody, then justice can be restored when another man's perfect choice is offered to everybody. It's all about bringing things back into balance.
Okay, let's tie this all back to our original question. How does this make it fair for Jesus to pay for something someone else did? Well, this whole framework of symmetric justice, this is presented as the spiritual, legal reason that makes the whole thing possible in the first place. The logic basically breaks down like this. Because humanity got a negative result it didn't earn, suffering and death, it is therefore just or fair for humanity to be offered a positive benefit it also didn't earn. The system is balanced. This whole thing doesn't just ignore the problem of sin, it's designed to restore justice, but, and this is key, only for the people who choose to accept that solution. But hang on, this justice framework, it's only one piece of the puzzle. The source adds another really critical layer. Even with this system of symmetric justice in place, the spiritual books still have to be balanced. A literal payment for sin, it argues, is still required.
So, how did that payment actually work? What were the mechanics of it? And this is where the source is very upfront and acknowledges a bit of a mystery. While the framework for why it was allowed is explained by symmetric justice, the nitty-gritty details of how that spiritual debt was actually paid off, well, that's not really spelled out in the texts.
However, the idea of the Messiah being a payment for sin, that wasn't some new concept that came out of nowhere. The source points us to much older prophecies, especially Isaiah chapter 53, which is interpreted as clearly describing the Messiah's role, to be a sacrifice for sin and to provide the very payment that this whole system requires. All right, so let's do a quick recap of the argument we've walked through. The answer to our big question isn't found in the law of Moses. Instead, you have to start by seeing the problem as the injustice of what we inherited from Adam. The solution, then, is this idea of symmetric justice, where a second Adam comes along and his perfect actions create an opportunity to balance out the first Adam's disobedience. And that is what makes atonement a fair act of restoration.